Alright, so good day class. So I decided to give this lecture for my design 3 because I've noticed that you guys are weak in your foundation and design theories. So let's start by looking at the 7 principles or the ordering principles in architectural theory, which is axis, symmetry, hierarchy, datum, rhythm, repetition, and transformation. So I hope that when you reach design 4, you'll be able to integrate these different principles already. So let's read this. So there exists a natural diversity and complexity in the program requirements for buildings. The forms and spaces of any building should acknowledge the hierarchy inherent in the functions they accommodate, the users they serve, the purposes or meaning they convey, the scope or context they address. So it is in recognition of this natural diversity, complexity, and hierarchy in the programming, designing, and making of buildings that ordering principles are discussed. So order without diversity can result in monotony or boredom. Diversity without order can produce chaos. So our work class, our jobs as architects is to make sure that we create a balance between order and uh, diversity. Okay? So your building should not be monotonous as well as chaotic. So that's the type of design that I wanted to see in your plates. So a sense of unity with variety is the ideal. The following ordering principles are seen as visual devices that allow the varied and diverse forms and spaces of buildings to coexist perceptually and conceptually within an ordered, unified, and harmonious whole. So this is an example of Pergamon. This is the plan of the upper city. This is 2nd century BC. I think this is already discussed in your history. So if you can see class, it's a combination of different ordering principles. So let's talk about different ordering principles. So the first is what you call axis. So axis is a line established by 2 points in space about which forms and spaces can be arranged in a symmetrical or balanced manner. Okay, so if this is an axis class, then you'll be able to arrange your spaces here at both sides. Okay, so that's the first ordering principle. Now let's go into symmetry. So symmetry is the balanced distribution and arrangement of equivalent forms and spaces on opposite sides of a dividing line or plane or about a center or axis. So if you look at this is symmetry because you could see that the same elements from one side to the other are repeated. And as you can see, glass, it also has an axis here. So this is the axis that passes through here. Then let's go into hierarchy. So hierarchy is the articulation of the importance or significance of a form or space by its size, shape, or placement relative to the other forms and spaces of the organization. So if these are the other spaces class which are less important compared to this one, okay, so these are arranged here in a grid-like manner, while the most important space it's separated to what you call this to give emphasis on this area. So that's his hierarchy. So this means that this space is relatively more important uh, from the other spaces because of its size, shape, or placement. Okay, so the squares here it's in a diagonal manner, while here it's placed regularly with a circle inside. So it will really depend up to you. So the next is rhythm. So rhythm is a unifying movement characterized by a patterned repetition or alteration of formal elements or motif in the same or a modified form. Okay. As you can see, guys, this is a square, okay? But you can see that there is movement, okay? Then it becomes more regular up as it goes here. So this is what you call rhythm. So the same element moving through repetition or alteration of formal elements. So that's rhythm. Then another is what you call a datum. So a datum is a line, plane, or volume that, by its continuity and regularity, serves to gather, measure, and organize a pattern of form and spaces. Okay, so this is example of a datum here. Then we have also transformation. So transformation is the principle that an architectural concept, structure, or organization can be altered through a series of discrete manipulations and permutations in response to a specific context or set of conditions without a loss of identity or concept. So as you can see here, you can see that the concept is not lost, even if you remove some of the elements. Okay, so for me, it looks like it's repeating or it's moving. You can see here, the second, already half, then at the third, it's already full. Okay, or if you look at from left to right, this is the full cross. Then you remove one element, and then you remove another element, but it's still the same concept. Otherwise, if you look at the three, that's the meaning of transformation. Okay, then let's look into the different examples. Okay, so this is an example of an axis. So an axis is perhaps the most elementary means of organizing forms and spaces in architecture. It is a line established by 2 points in space about which forms and spaces can be arranged in a regular or irregular manner. So, for example, this is the Florentine Street. For Florentine Street, flanked by the Office Palace here. So, this is the axis class. So, you can see there are spaces passing the both sides of the axis. So, there are 2 points connecting them. Okay? So since an axis is essentially a linear condition, it has qualities of length and direction, and induces movement and promotes views along its path. Okay, so if you're moving through an axis, it should be best that you have views also as you move up through the space. Then for its definition, an axis must be terminated at both of its ends by a significant form or space. Okay, so at both of the ends, it should be terminated there. Then the notion of an axis can be reinforced by defining edges along its length. These edges can be simply lines on the ground plane or vertical planes that define a linear space coincident with the axis. Then an axis can also be established simply by a symmetrical arrangement of forms and spaces. I like this one, class. Okay. Now let's move next to the next, which is symmetry. So when an actual condition can exist without a symmetrical condition being simultaneously present, a symmetrical condition cannot exist without implying the existence of an axis or center about which it is constructed. Of course, this is true because if you don't have an axis, you won't be able to convey the notion of symmetry. Like for this example. Okay, so without an axis here, you won't be able to tell that this is the exact uh, mirror image of the other side. So that's symmetry. Let's move to hierarchy. So hierarchy is the principle of hierarchy implies that in most, if not all, architecture compositions, real differences exist among their forms and spaces. These differences reflect the degree of importance of these forms and spaces, as well as the functional, formal, and symbolic roles they play in the organization. So this is a sketch by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay? If you look at this perspective class, you can see that we here.
Magkuan na lang, magtel.
Okay, so looking at this class here, look if you look at the sketch of Leonardo da Vinci, okay, so you can see that this space is the most important here. Okay, so if you look at the perspective that he draw, so this is in a higher uh, area. Okay, so there's a point of emphasis, so it's massing. So it has a higher ceiling compared to the other spaces. And let's look at datum. Okay, so I think this is the example that is set at datum. So a datum refers to a line or plane or volume of reference to which other elements in a composition can relate. It organizes a random pattern of elements to its regularity, continuity, and constant presence. For example, the lines of a musical staff serves as a datum in providing the visual basis for the reading notes and the relative pitches of their tones. Okay, so here class, the line class here, this is the datum here, which organizes the entire musical notes. Okay. Without these lines, it would look like this. So it's not, it won't be organized. Okay. For example, here, I think the datum here is the square. Without the square, it would just like be circles in a space. Okay. So this is the datum. Let's look for other examples. Yeah. For this one, I think the datum here is the element here. If you look at this in this uh, point of direction. Let's go into rhythm. This is the column digits for the Notre Dame La Grande. So rhythm refers to any movement characterized by a pattern recurrence of elements or motifs at regular or irregular intervals. The movement may be of our eyes as we follow recurring elements in a composition or of our bodies as we advance through a sequence of spaces. In either case, rhythm incorporates the notion of repetition as a device to organize forms and spaces in architecture. So I think that's self-explanatory already. Then you also have repetition. So we tend to group elements in a random composition according to their closeness or proximity to one another, the visual characteristics they share in common. So the principle of repetition utilizes both of these concepts of visual perception to order recurring elements in a composition. So this is an example of repetition. So the simplest form of repetition is a linear pattern of redundant elements. Elements need not be perfectly identical, however, to be grouped in a repetitive fashion. They may merely share a common trait or a common denominator, allowing each element to be individually unique yet belong to the same family. Okay. Like here, there's the different sizes, but it's just repeated. Here, these are the different shapes, okay, but it's becoming bigger as it moves to the direction to the right. Here, you have some of the detailed characteristics which are the same, but it's still repetition. And let's go to transformation. So in the study of architecture, as with other disciplines, should legitimately involve the study of its past, of prior experiences, endeavors, and accomplishments from which much can be learned and emulated. The principle of transformation accepts this notion. So this book and all of the examples it contains is predicated on it. So the principle of transformation allows a designer to select a prototypical architectural model whose formal structure and ordering elements might be appropriate and reasonable, and to transform it through a series of discrete manipulations in order to respond to the specific conditions and context of the design task at hand. So design is a generative process of analysis and synthesis, of trial and error, of trying out possibilities and seizing opportunities. In the process of exploring an idea and probing its potential, it's essential that the designer understand the fundamental nature and structure of the concept. If the ordering system of a prototypical model is perceived and understood, then the original design concept can, through a series of finite permutations, be clarified, strengthened, and built upon rather than destroyed. Okay. Like for example, this one you can see that from this transformed, then more details are added to it until it reached this shape. So that's the planned development of the North Indian Sela. Yeah. I think another example is the Scheme for Three Libraries by Alvaro Alto. Then the Seinajoki Public Library. And then the Rovaniemi City Library in Finland. The Library of Mount Angel. So I think, yeah, it's a sample of a transformation. Okay. So this is an example of a transformation of a cruciform plan by Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is the cruciform plan. And when you implement it, it's still in a cruciform plan, but of course you need to follow functionality. So it's not a perfect cruciform plan. So the interpretation is not literal. Because in architecture, of course, you have to consider the anthropomorphic and ergonometric considerations class. Okay? So you don't have to be quite literal when you transform an object into your plan. Okay? So if you have any further questions or clarifications, class, you can uh, contact me. Okay? And if I'm online and not busy, I'll always reply. Okay, so see you next week.